just read one of the shorter Madame Realism stories. And just to say that this, I'm very fortunate that Semiotext published this. They published the Madame Realism complex in 1992. And at that time, I think there were about 7 Madame Realism stories. And after many, many years, many years, the edition was sold out. I mean, just imagine, it was around for 20 years, and finally it sold out. And Hetty L. Colte, who's the managing editor, said, well, we'd like to reprint. And I said, well, I'm not writing Madame Realism anymore. Why don't we just do the complete Madame Realism and some other, the complete page-turner stories and some new ones? And he said yes, and it was go from that moment. So I'm going to read a shorter Madame Realism, and this was written, I don't know if any of you know Marco Breuer's work, but I wrote this in relationship to or in response to Marco Breuer's work. This is called Madame Realism's Torch Song. The other night as he sat near the fire in Madame Realism's study, in the place where chance had made them neighbors for a period of time, Wiley said, things go on we don't know about. They happen in the dark, metaphorically sometimes, but maybe you don't want to talk about dark stuff now. Marilyn Manson, Madame Realism said, told someone on MTV that Lionel Richie was the heart of darkness. There's the light side, he said, but it has a shorter life. Wiley struck a match. It sparks, flares, burns out. He turned from the fireplace where he was watching the fire to her. Wiley looked grave or intent. Madame Realism felt strange the way she often did. She hadn't known him very long, and for a moment he spooked her. Then he returned his attention to the hearth. Fire's positive, negative, amoral, not capable of reason, which reminds me of something. Are you going to tell me a ghost story, Madame Realism asked? Wiley's large, almost childlike eyes were silvery gray, like his hair, but his irises were flecked with brown and yellow, and especially when the fire caught them, they luminesced like a cat's. He stoked the fire and it leaped higher into the air. Do you believe in ghosts? He asked. Tonight, Wiley's manner or words or tone or bearing bordered on the dramatic. Did she believe in ghosts? She felt ghosted. Ghosts had a place in her vocabulary. Did it matter if they existed? She expected to be haunted by her past, and bodies kept turning up. Wiley might be someone who knew her differently from the way she knew herself, or he might be someone she once knew, disguised. His voice soothed and disquieted her. It was oddly familiar, but then lately everyone seemed familiar, which was a benign kind of horror. You and I are sitting together talking. We came here to get away, and far off in a place you've never been, or at home, something is happening that could undermine your plans. A lover is slipping out of love, or someone is scheming against you. Madame Realism noted to herself that she'd found a dire soulmate, another paranoid. Wiley nodded circumspectly, or as if he'd heard her thoughts. We have very little control. All our small plans can be overturned he snapped his fingers. It was an old-fashioned gesture. His fingers tapered elegantly at the ends. In another life, he might have been a flamenco dancer. In politics, nothing is really hidden in your life. If someone moves faster or decides to play hardball or has a scheme and you have a small role or you're a bystander or an obstacle, your life changes. We're ants or tigers or rats, and we run from one place to another, avoiding or ignoring what's probably inevitable. Something, an enemy, could just Wiley tended to finish his sentences with his hands, and this time he moved his left hand in the air, drawing a line through the space in front of him. Madame Realism focused on the fire because his eyes were becoming impenetrable like colored contact lenses. She stared into it, seeing and not seeing, hypnotized or lulled. His words and pauses were the soundtrack to its chemistry. But it's important to let things develop even in the dark, because surprises like fire, positive and negative. So I like found poems and objects, and this may be crazy, but I make things disappear, Wiley said, just to find them. I study ordinary actions and reactions and all kinds of innocent signs. The collision of uneven things provokes a third element. Wiley clapped his hands together. The flames burned indifferently in the fireplace, and Madame Realism thought of alchemy, which usually never came to mind. There was a time, she supposed, when art and science were indivisible, and the place where they fused might have been alchemical. "Do you love fire?" he asked. "I don't know if I'd call it love." To herself, she proposed, "Imagine life without fire." But she couldn't. The world was raw, endless, and empty. She got no further. "I've considered pyromania," she went on, "but I don't know what it'd be in place of, unless there's an infinite parade and you could love millions of different things. Would pyromania substitute for heterosexuality? I could be attracted to men and want to start fires and see them burn, while watching handsome men put them out." Wiley stared at her now with open affection. She thought about the true marriage of opposites, attraction, wedding, repulsion, and a headline, "Pyromaniac is a firefighter." Earlier, she had started the fire that glowed now by twisting single pages of old newspaper into rod-like forms and placing kindling on top of them, arranging the thin sticks of dry wood into a configuration she'd never tried before, but which Wiley had employed effectively when Madame Realism first visited him. He was, in his words, quote, "originally a country person adept at fire building," unquote. His wife had disappeared 2 months or years ago. Madame Realism couldn't remember now, and he didn't say more about it or her. He went about building the fire, patiently teaching her his surefire method, which she hadn't yet perfected. "What matters to me," Wiley said, "is the subtle experiment. It appears insignificant, but breeds results no one would expect. Unexpected results from ordinary things are wonderful." Not unwanted pregnancy, she thought, and poked the fire, which was alive and raised its red hot head quickly. She always wondered what ordinary was. She always thought she would remember which was the best technique to start a fire, but she didn't. She didn't write anything down. She relied on memory. She didn't like tending a fire. She was easily distracted. She didn't like having to watch it to make sure it kept burning. "I don't want my illusions to protect me," Wiley said, warming to his subject. "I need to protect them. I have to distinguish between fantasy and evidence, the world outside me. I want to produce fantastic things and control the things I make and do, but I also don't. I'm caught in that drama, a two-hander, but they're my hands, so I'm playing with myself." The double entendre dropped plumply at her feet. Wiley didn't seem to notice he was inside his own theater. Madame Realism hesitated. "I don't want to be manipulated," she said. It was an ugly word, but she pronounced all its syllables distinctly. Then she added, "But sometimes manipulation is fun. So maybe that's not true." Tonight the fire caught easily, but she didn't know why. Yesterday she had placed the kindling in approximately the same way, and it hadn't. There was a blazing fire now when yesterday the fire had died out because of the wetness of the wood or a slight difference in the configuration of the kindling and small logs with which Madame Realism always began, or because she had become absorbed in other matters. Maybe she'd forgotten she'd started a fire. That's the battle, Wiley said, seemingly out of nowhere, out of no place she was. Was he thinking about manipulation or fire? What I love most, I can't control, Madame Realism said. Like conversation, the immediacy of it, and how she never knew why it had started, what its necessity was, where it was going to end up, or what its lasting effects might be, if any. Conversation was ordinary, but it was also an unforeseeable element that allowed for eruptions in the everyday. Madame Realism saw herself vacillating inside the grid with other creatures, temporary set pieces on a chessboard. She often wanted to leap into the corny unknown. Something about Wiley and his wondrous eyes, Renaissance orbs, encouraged that longing. But escape, she'd been told 1,000,000 times, was impossible. It also had predictable forms and outcomes. In ordinary encounters, he went on, we expect people to hold up their end of the bargain. If you or I did something strange at dinner, didn't pass the salt, or if you didn't answer a friend's, how are you? Something as nothing as that. The whole situation would become tense, people would get angry, and all you'd done was not respond. Madame Realism considered responses, his and hers, and the fires. A fire dies out when it's not tended, not responded to, but it could do the opposite. It could spread rapaciously, but if she were in the room, she'd notice it because the heat would become overpowering. I'd sense it, she thought. Though sometimes when Madame Realism was working or on the television, she did not notice something that could, if not checked in time, hurt her. A fire might spread quickly and overcome her. If she didn't escape fast enough, she could be badly burned or maybe suffer grotesque disfiguration, requiring costly surgery to return her face to relative normality. Normality is always relative, though not ever again to be pretty or even attractive, or she might die. Madame Realism didn't know how much time had passed, a minute, maybe more. Wiley waited quietly for her to return. His having come from the country implied reserves of patience to her, but Madame Realism hadn't asked which country. Still, farmers everywhere wait for eggs to hatch, crops to ripen. Wiley seemed an unlikely farmer. She knew little about him. He could be anything. She wondered why his wife had left him, or if she even existed. She wondered if he missed her and still wanted her, if he would forever, no matter what her response to him was now. When Madame Realism was no longer in love, her lover's eyes, which in the middle of an exacting passion she could not leave, whose every glance she scrutinized to discern greater meaning, and which she thought unforgettable, when she was so far from any feelings of love or lust as to make recollection or meaning impossible, her lover's eyes and every other aspect of him lost interest, as if he and they had never been capable of exerting it. Bliss metamorphosed into disgust. In that sense, love was an experiment with unexpected results. Relationships were unpredictable. She had been told by men that men were more generous or more practical than women and could easily have sex again with anyone they once loved. She didn't feel she could ask Wiley about that yet. He bunched up a sheet of newspaper and placed it nonchalantly near the flames. It might catch if the fire moved its way. Then he dropped a chocolate-covered cherry into his mouth and straightened its crinkly gold wrapper on the slate floor as if he were ironing it. She liked the smell of clothes being ironed, but wasn't sure if she liked that gesture and questioned how much meaning to give it. A fire changes all the time, he said, in an ordinary way. Madame Realism now watched it like a movie, whose characters she invented. She sat closer to it, wanting everything in close-up. She tried to feel what she believed she was supposed to feel near a fire, heated by its quixotic flames. The fire changed, but it also stayed the same. A blur of blue, purple, yellow, orange, red, ephemeral, shifting, restless. With just a sheet of newspaper tossed casually onto it, it roared approval and grew bigger. She liked watching it, but it also could become boring, tiresome, the way anything could, especially when you were older and more in need of novelty. Sometimes she found herself feeding it like a child until she lost interest, which she shouldn't if it were. Wiley stood up, brushing off his black jeans. "Do you think about beauty?" he asked. "Sometimes, but I'm not sure how," she said, feeling a little melancholy the way she did on her birthday. Beauty was the point, and it was pointless too. "Is your ghost story about beauty?" Madame Realism asked. "Beauty's a ghost that haunts us," Wiley said comically. Then he hunched his back and extended his arms, spreading them wide like the wings of a bat or an angel. A figure of loss, she thought. Together and apart, they looked inward or at the hearth and wandered silently into the past. The greedy fire, meanwhile, consumed everything. "What ghost are you?" Wiley asked, finally. "Everyone dead I've ever loved," she said. Beautiful. After the fire died, what remained were traces of its former glory, ashes and bits of coal-like wood. Wiley and Madame Realism walked outside into the cold night. They went in search of shooting stars and other necessary irrelevancies. Thank you.
So, first of all, that was amazing.
Thank you.
So when I read your work, I can hear you reading in such a particular way. And part of it is that I've heard you read a bunch, but also I think your voice really inhabits. It's funny because it's not necessarily such personal work,
no.
And yet it has this personal heft of the writer. I mean, I think your writing is really writer's work. I mean, obviously because you are a writer, but I think that's kind of the persona, and maybe particularly this book, in a way.
That's interesting. I learned a lot about giving a reading when I was a co-director of a film, and we were working with actors and auditioning actors, which I have to say is one of the most amusing things in the world, because at a certain point some actors will start to cry. It's kind of, they have certain techniques they use, but the idea of inhabiting the words as you're mm-hmm. reading them. Is that okay back there? Okay. Yeah, it isn't personal work. Uh-huh. That is true, and yet, as I think in reading it, it feels intimate to me, mm-hmm. Even if it's not my life or my intimacy or something.
Right. Yeah. Well, the phrase, for some reason, a phrase that we've all heard many times, but when it passed through in the story, it was exciting to me as he warmed to his subject.
Right.
And I think the act of reading and even the act of writing is that there's a heat mm-hmm. that comes just from this is next to this is next to that, this is next to that, and then the associations create a warmth and a quickening and a personality.
That's a beautiful way to think about it. Because I was using this fire, I was finding metaphors and verbs and all of that would kind of include the fire. But also I like to use sort of old-fashioned phrases. I mean, in our reading we have read warmed to his subject, but mm-hmm. how many times do people now say he warmed to his subject? And yet it really is what people do as they begin talking about something that they're passionate about. And of course, mm-hmm. passion has heat or warmth in it too.
Actually, there's lots of fire in this book too, which was very...
And yet I'm really not a pyromaniac.
Oh, right. Something in you is. But there's one little quote that I wanted to... it seems very propitious that we would be speaking tonight, and without even particularly talking about who we support in this election. Here we are at the eve of something, and I think we all needed something good to do tonight. And
yes.
I was happy for Lynne and I that we had this.
Yes.
But
some distraction for you.
It's very strange.
And for us, actually.
Yeah. But there's a quote in one of the Page Turner stories, and it's from Gore Vidal, who, again, I felt like I never thought of Lynne Tillman Gore Vidal before, and then suddenly I thought, this really works in a way, because I think increasingly as I was looking through the book and reading it, I thought, you're very much a public writer. You know, there's something, and even masculine, you know, and then I thought of the two of us talking, and I thought, and I don't, you know, like I'm not like making a hierarchical thing, but I think there really are masculine women and feminine women and masculine men and feminine men and so on. And it's sort of about, in a way, I'm thinking about choices and affiliations and I, you know, like I feel like somehow the father is in here more than the mother, you know, and the way you handle masculine characters feels like they're very comfortable tools, you know, for you as a writer. But let me read this one quote, which is from Gore Vidal. Any American who is prepared to run for president should automatically, by definition, be disqualified from ever doing so. Which I thought was hysterical to think about on the eve of the election. And so smart and wise, you know, and I think, I mean, obviously with this particular election, because I think part of what people so dislike about Hillary Clinton, and I think is, and more so because she's female, is that she's qualified.
Yeah.
You know, I just think that pisses people off. It's so wrong in some way. You know, like how can we make that go away? And I think all the corruption shit is almost the only way you can say that you know.
The amount of irrationality that this election cycle, and if we ever have another 2-year election cycle like this, I think I want to throw myself out a window. You know, but the amount of irrationality and is just unbelievable. And it started, I mean, from jump it started. And seeing those 17 guys, well, 16 guys and 1 woman in the Republican debates, I don't know what they were. What were they?
They were commotional.
They were, yeah. And somehow Trump was the last man standing.
Right, right. Which bowling alley would that ever happen in?
Yeah.
You know, the stupid pin, right? It was just.
We were talking on the way up here from the East Village. Eileen and I have lived in the same place forever. And I said to her that I was feeling a little more positive about things for tomorrow because I was in an Indian restaurant the other night, and one I go to a lot, and the waiter, whom I've known forever, said, he talked more than he ever really had, and he said, that Trump, that man, he's an idiot. Like that. It was so wonderful. And of course he is an idiot. He is an idiot.
Yeah, I think we agree.
Yeah. Anyway.
But you know where I was going with the Gore Vidal and the masculine and the is this notion of you as a public writer and also in particular looking at this book because I think of what is Madame Realism. I mean, I almost think of her as a kind of coin. You know, it's sort of like it's almost like so my question is, how and why did you create her, and what does she represent to you? Because I see her as in a way, it's sort of like it's a moving piece, so that you could. I mean, these are very public works in a certain way. I feel like the idea of using it's almost a pronoun who is a bust in a way, you know, and you can use her for talking about art, you can use her to talk about contemporary politics and culture, you know, so it seems like a wand of sorts that is not a soft thing at all. It seems very
tough and
and profile.
A coin of the realm.
Yeah, exactly. So who the hell is Madame Realism, and why did you invent her, and how does she work for you?
She's a creature of necessity, I think. I'd been asked to contribute to a magazine of surrealism. This was in the 80s, and I just thought, oh, that's ridiculous. You know, why would you be doing a magazine of surrealism? And I thought about.
And why did you do it?
Why? Well, I didn't. I said no to them. But then when I got off the phone, you know how things remain in your head, and you're having this conversation with yourself. And I started thinking about Merritt Oppenheim, who was a great artist, and and I had interviewed, it was the first time I'd ever done an interview, and I'd interviewed her in Paris. I was living in Europe after college. And she had, you know, like many female surrealists, she was in the back of the bus. And so from that, I thought of surrealism, S-I-R, then it went to Madame Realism, and I wrote the first Madame Realism story. And then when Art in America, Craig Owens, the senior editor there, one of the senior editors there in '86, asked me if I would write about Renoir for this symposium on Renoir with all these heavy hitter art historians. I said, Craig, you know, I'm not an art historian. We know that. So I decided to bring Madame Realism back. And yes, in a way, it's interesting to think of that as public writing because I don't really like Renoir very much. And I was going to this museum in Boston, which was a huge show, and there were lines, and people loved Renoir, you know, and I thought, well, who am I to, you know, what does it matter what I think? And that's often the way I think. What does it matter what Lynne Tillman thinks about something? And so
that's so funny in terms of the subject, the title of that book. What would Lynne Tillman think? And privately, you're thinking, who cares what Lynne Tillman thinks?
Yeah, what would Lynne Tillman do? I didn't make up the title. You know, what would Lynne Tillman do? No, that is something that has been with me for since I was a kid. What does it matter what I think? Obviously, I try to make it matter that I think, but and what I think about, but.
So then, can I interject?
Yes.
So who or what steps, and I mean, I think that's a really interesting moment for any writer. And if I can think of 1,000 times somebody asked me to write something or to do something, I'm like, no. And then you walk away and they think,
Right,
and it's like that perverse side. You think, in what way could I deliver?
Exactly.
And it's not even necessarily because they're offering you a lot of money or that this is such a hot gig, but just somehow it's just like that flip, the coin flips.
Yes.
And you do that thing. So my question, so who steps up in that moment?
In that moment, I think that sort of oppositional, contrary side of me,
which is
fighting back, and I got angry just thinking about surrealism and Merritt Oppenheim and all of that, and then it's kind of like, well, what do you do with this anger?
Yeah.
You know, how do you work with that? And I think one of the things that people who make art or who write do is kind of funnel some of that, and sometimes it's conscious, sometimes it's unconscious, into a way to make something. You're dealing with feelings and thoughts, and I wasn't going to call that guy up again and say, you asshole, what are you asking me to write about surrealism for? No, I wanted to do something with him rather than get angry at him.
And then also, I mean, like I think you think and write about film a lot, and I think part of the thing that you talk about and do in your writing a lot is this kind of nextness of what you put next to each other and what you put, like that film theory kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so when somebody asks you for the ridiculous thing, it's sort of like what's really interesting and really changing in exactly the aesthetic statement that you see me making in this book a lot is the thing you put next to that.
Yes.
That is so radically wrong and changes the question. It's sort of like in almost like in a kind of undermining way. You undermine the question.
That's right. And what Eileen's referring to is the Kuleshov experiment, where Lev Kuleshov, early part of the 20th century, along with other Soviet linguists and so on, were thinking about what it means to sequence in film. And if you put a woman's head next to a tub, next to a horse's head, and then you move these frames around, you will have different meanings created by that sequencing. And so that kind of juxtaposition is also, to me, very interesting, and I do work with that in my writing. Yeah.
When you wrote about Joan Jonas, the whole piece is almost like constructed of that.
That's right.
I mean, you're just taking bits and pieces of it's kind of an iteration of her film.
That's right. It was a description rather than an explanation of it. She made a film in 1971 that's just, I think it was 8mm, and she was shooting in the passenger seat. It's called Berlin 1971, or Berlin Road Movie 1971. And she was, before the wall came down, there was only one way to go from West Germany into East Germany into Berlin, and it was this country road through East Germany, and that was it. You know, that was the way to go. And she made a road movie just of that. But she did some sequencing, so sometimes you saw a woman's face and a car, and then you saw the road again, and then she would mix that up. And so I was responding to that, and that fascinates me. How one plays with context.
And a lot of the context of the book, too, are friends, are other artists.
Yeah. Well, I think probably being around artists, being around other writers, being around visual artists has been and continues to be a way that I can think differently. I mean, learning from them, looking at their work. That's you write about art also. It's just that I used to, in college I studied painting, as I took all my electives in studio work, and it was fascinating to me to work on a canvas and to deal with that space rather than trying to write something. And the brain is so active, and you feel like you're firing, you know, I mean, to the extent I could, deal with this canvas, and it's a different kind of thinking. You're thinking constantly as you're doing it, but it's different from the way in which I was thinking maybe more. I guess every medium has its own logic, you know, and you are working with a certain logic or against it, I guess. I guess I'm more against things than I am for them.
That's really You're sort of a flamer.
That's right. That's right. That's right. I'm not a hater, but I'm against things.
Right. I mean, are you ever pissed off at visual artists?
In what sense?
I don't know. Either on the level of their privilege, or just because the work pisses you off. You were asked to write about something, and it was like, I actually hate this work.
No. I'm happy to say not. And I don't think they're privileged. I guess I know too many. I mean, it's true. On a certain level, the way in which writers are paid and artists are paid are very different if the painter or the photographer has hit it and is making a lot of money, but most people don't. And also the people I know who are making a lot of money from their work or not making a lot of money from work seem to be similar anyway. In other words, they're doing what they need to do and want to do, and they're very principled about it. I don't think I hang out with shams, but you never know.
Right.
A good sham. It's a funny word, isn't it, sham? Because it also is what covers the bottom of a mattress, right? Of a bed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's the only next time I ever saw that word.
I wonder which came first, a person
or the thing. I think the thing always comes first,
okay.
Right? Person always.
Somebody could be hiding under a sham,
right?
And then be a sham.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So, do you want to talk about the? I mean, it's really literal, but it's interesting, the construction of this book. Because when I first picked up the book, I thought, oh, it's all the Madame Realism, and in fact, it's these novellas, and it's these pieces about your friends. So, what did you have in mind? I mean, like, what's the array? What does it mean?
To me.
Yeah. Or what was the pleasure? What was the purpose?
I think that's a very hard question. The pleasure, I think, is a sense of completion, having things together in one place. It's very interesting to me in the late 70s when I came back from Europe. I had been reading Paul Bowles for years, but people I knew, reading him in the 70s, but people I knew in the States mostly didn't know his work. And then I think it was Black Sparrow Press, came out with the collected Paul Bowles stories, and suddenly everyone was reading Paul Bowles. And I think the realization that a book, an anthology, not an anthology, a collection, had such an impact. And then you realize, of course, this story is here, that story is there. How can anyone get a sense of this? So for me, having a collection with all the Madame Realism stories, all of them, and I really have stopped writing her. And the 3-page Turner novellas, she's a very different character. And
Who is
they're
she?
all there.
Who is she? So
Who's Paige?
Yeah.
I think that Paige was the depressed writer in me. You know, and not me again, but you know, trying to figure out how to write about writing. The first one was about. The first one was called To Find Words, and that was very much about a writer who can't find the right words, and there are different parts of it where she's writing in different styles and writing different stories in different styles, trying to find a voice, and then ultimately rejecting the idea of a solitary voice, a single voice for a writer. So I think that was it, although the last one was not, and that's my favorite Page Turner one called Thrilled to Death, which
is incredible, which is,
Thank
I
you.
mean, for that alone, get this book, because it's really
Wow.
amazing.
That's
It takes
an
place at a fair,
Right,
you know,
right.
and it was very weird and very erotic, because suddenly and a lot of, you know, it was just, you know, there's that strange dark-haired character over there, and things, you know, obviously these characters are coming together at the fair. But it just suddenly kicked in this realization of what the fair, you know, like growing up, it was this strange, out of control thing that would come to town. And
That's
that
right.
shitty baseball field would suddenly have all this stuff, and
Right.
it would be transformed. And it was kind of a, you know, like a childhood or adolescence experience of magic.
Right, that's right. It was that you know, you would go to a carnival or fair and bright lights and things happening and people, you know, you didn't know who these people were, and the world was topsy-turvy. And then years later, I read Bakhtin, and he talks about the carnival, and that here's the idea that in the carnival, well, there were. Whether it's in Catholicism and probably before in pagan stuff, this was a place where, and Mardi Gras today, you know, where everything was topsy-turvy, where people could do things that they wouldn't normally do, or that would be socially ostracized at another time. And so these little carnivals that came round, maybe they were on your block or something, you believed you didn't know what was going to happen. I don't know how that functions now with the internet, maybe with crowds showing up somewhere. That's a kind of carnival, but this was very specific, and there were certain types, right? There was
And these characters feel like types. It's very noir, you know, and it just feels loose like a film rather than a story.
Yes,
the form is really unique.
Thank you. That came about because Jessica Stockholder did an installation at DIA many, many years ago. It was her first installation there. And she asked if I would write for the catalog that she did. And I walked into it as it was under construction, and I had this immediate association to the cabinet of Dr. Caligari. I don't know if all of you have seen it, or if you haven't, it's extraordinary. It is a carnival, but it's a very, you know, wonderfully dark film from early 20s, I think. And so I had that sense walking into her, and so immediately I thought I was going to write a carnival. And I don't know that anyone else would have felt walking into that space.
So is this that?
Yeah.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah.
So that just makes me want to ask you more about art writing, which I think, weirdly, as a writer, is kind of one of my most. It's a weirdly exciting opportunity.
Yes.
Because we get commissioned. Like people say,
Yes.
you know, they ask you the wrong question, and it's like this funny contest,
Yeah.
you know, and then you like throw something at them,
Yeah.
you know, and it's like your skills as a writer just get this rare opportunity to strut and
Yeah.
to.
And to respond to some, it's very hard writing words about words, but it's there's a way in which writing about or writing to art or poses very different questions and problematics, and I think because both of us are so-called creative writers, we bring to, as opposed to art historians or art critics, we bring to how we do things this other discipline, which has a very different idea. You're focusing on writing first,
Right.
and how the writing works with the art, and it's very pleasurable. Also, I like getting commissions, not just about money, but
Yeah.
but I like somebody saying to me, and Dennis Cooper thinks this is so weird. I like people saying to me, "Why don't you write about this?" Or "Why don't you write that?" It's interesting to me. Or "Would you write about this?"
Yeah.
And then I want to take that up somehow. It's a kind of challenge, or maybe it's sort of Oulipian. It's a kind of constraint. You don't choose what you're writing about.
And it's also a prompt.
Yes.
It's just exactly the
Yeah.
thing when you teach writing. It's like you got to give them a, you know,
Yeah.
you know, get the poet gig and you go
Yeah.
to the library and you meet the kids and you read some poems and they said, no, give them a prompt.
Right.
I was like, you know, but really it's fun.
Yes.
You just think of some crazy thing and you ask them to
What
do
was
it.
the craziest thing you've ever asked students to do?
Write a poem from any age in your life, and they, you know, they had tiny lives. They were like in high school or 12 or something, and go down the drain with it.
And go down the drain with it?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow, what a metaphor.
I mean, I got something really good out of it. I don't know. I can't remember what they did, but it is exactly that. It's like when somebody says, "I love your work. Write about my, you know, come write about my show," and you go to their studio or you're standing in the gallery, and it's just like it's performative, right?
Yes, yes, yeah. And I was thinking one time I went into, I was teaching one semester at Yale in the sculpture department as a visiting critic, and I went into this young woman's studio, and all that was there, and really the studio was bare. It was a kind of string hanging down the center of this big room. And we, you know, at first confronted with that, I think, well, what am I going to say to her? And then we ended up having the most interesting conversation, because she wanted to strip everything away. She just wanted to look at this string. And you know, after a while, I thought, well, isn't that great? Because yeah, how could I in writing strip everything away and then get to this one thing? How would you do it? Very, very hard. But it was very bold of her, right? I mean, that's
Exactly.
a really, I think artists take enormous chances.
Yeah.
I mean, we're all foolish in
Yeah.
some way.
Yeah. Well, I think when you go to schools and you have to do studio visits too, it's so like you're kind of, I'm always like, am I the prostitute or am I the therapist? Because you keep going around to these little rooms.
Right,
And
right,
you know, exactly that. I had like a girl who was like, she constructed a bed. I think she had been through some traumatic thing. And so she constructed a bed, and she goes, I know this is a little bit weird, but I'm going to lie under the bed. Like, she got under the bed, and I sat in the chair, and she said, now let's talk. And I did. I felt like, I said, no, so tell me what happened last summer. What made you do this work?
Yeah.
And she just was down under there kind of droning. And it was sort of wonderful. I felt like, I don't know what I thought about the work, but I felt so close to her
Yes.
after it, you know?
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah, I thought, what is this that we're doing?
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, we writers, I think, are way more secretive than most of the visual artists I know going in. I mean, not that there aren't great paranoids among them and so on. I wouldn't want to take that away from them. But there's just something about the act of writing that has this sort of secret feeling about it.
Right.
You wouldn't want somebody standing over your shoulder as, you know, and yet, let's say that Michael Almereyda made a wonderful film of William Eggleston, and Eggleston let him follow him around. You know, there's no way I would let anyone stand behind me as I was writing.
Right, right.
You know, I mean, also it would be visually so uninteresting.
Have you ever been in the situation, I mean, like when we go to artist colonies, they give you these beautiful, discrete places to
Yeah.
work, and it's all, I mean, the more privacy they give you, the more we like the artist colony.
Right.
But I've been in places where they had few resources, and like 6 of us would be in a room, and what we had instead of privacy was time and rules, and so we would like just be quiet from 9 to 12, and then everybody would have lunch, and then we would be quiet from 2 to 4.
How did you do with that?
It was surprisingly well. It was
Really?
very weird.
I couldn't have.
Because it was just like you had to go so deep inside of yourself to write.
But I would hear the little computer thing, you
Yeah.
know, and I'd get very annoyed.
It was like that listen to that motherfucker go, like Michelle
Yeah,
T was just like, I was like listening to a cat write or something. I was like, so, no.
So, should we?
Be more open now? What time? I don't even know how long we've been talking. 8 o'clock, oh my God.
Yeah.
Perhaps you guys have questions?
Yeah.
When you were writing from the standpoint of Madame Realism, did you find that the character itself ever expressed opinions you wouldn't necessarily have yourself, or critiques that you wouldn't necessarily have yourself, that were true to the character?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I do write characters who, it wasn't that she could do this without me, you know, but I do have characters say things that I as a person wouldn't say, yeah. I just enjoy that also. That's what's great about characters, having characters. Allows you to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Does she change her opinions, or does she evolve?
Well, if you read all of the stories, and they're in chronological order, I think she does change. It's hard for me to say how that is.
Right.
It's being able to be outside something in a way that I don't think I can be. But I do think, as I was writing her over the years, that she was changing, or I was changing her, obviously, to address different issues.
There's, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to know how you two met.
Oh, so Marilyn Mendon did come.
Yeah,
We
she
like-
did.
We were like, this is your
She's not
seat over there.
sitting
You
at her
snuck in and sat someplace else. Huh. I
Yes,
know.
you.
David Rattray. Because David Rattray was my fierce friend in around 1982, and we were sort of drinking ourselves to death together, excitedly. And while we were doing that, I had to meet every wonderful person he knew in New York. I had to, David was one of those people, if he loved you, you had to meet his family. And that meant his family of friends. And so one night, it was just like, you must meet Lynne Tillman. And he's one of those people, you can't talk about David without imitating David.
Yeah.
And so I remember very specifically the night you came over to my apartment and sitting on the couch and you coming over, and it was just, it was lovely right away, I think.
Wow.
I mean, it may have not been lovely for you. I think I was probably drunk.
No. I'm sure I had a great time. I think we should say something about David Rattray.
Right.
David Rattray was this polymath. He was one of the most brilliant people we've ever known. He was a poet. He was a translator.
Translator to French, Spanish, Sanskrit, Greek, Latin.
He would just keep teaching himself languages.
Icelandic. He was amazing.
He did a lot of there's a big Artaud anthology. Nobody reads Artaud anymore, do they?
I don't know.
It used to be read a lot, but and David did a lot of the translations. And he lived in the Beat Hotel in the 60s he had He was from, I guess you'd call it an upper-class American family, Harvard and all
East
that.
Hampton, the East Hampton
Yeah.
Star, that's his family, and
Yeah.
his grandfather was a whaler.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they were
It was
like,
just a wonderful, he was very tall, and he had a horse face, very
Yeah.
long.
shot
horse-
dope with John Wieners,
Yeah.
had sex with Rene Ricard, he was bisexual. I mean, he like did everything.
He did everything.
And
that's
then became
right.
a poet late in life, kind
Yeah.
of. Like, always wanted to be a poet. And I think finally really became a poet when he stopped drinking.
Yes.
It's kind of amazing.
He also played the clavichord and the harpsichord and
Early
I mean,
music, I mean,
He's the kind of person no one is anymore.
well, it'll happen, you know.
You think so?
I don't know, I mean, I think we have to give
Well,
room
when we
to the
have
world to-
implants, you know, there'll be an implant that's able to play harpsichord.
But also, I think Semiotext published his first book.
Yes, that's
And it
right.
was called How I Became One of the Invisible.
Invisible, and-
And it came out after he died.
That's right. No, it came out before. It
Just
came out
before.
6 months because Semiotext was bringing out Madame Realism, the first Madame Realism book, and his book came out. We had a book party together. And then he went off with you. He
went off with the lesbians.
That's right. That's how he wrote about it.
Because he had a lesbian sister, the most amazing lesbian sister who just died, who was in Paris in the 40s, like right after World War II, and hung out with Jimmy Baldwin at
Yeah.
the, man, she had stories.
Yeah.
I mean-
And so he went off with the lesbians for dinner later, and
Yeah.
but then he got brain cancer, and not
Just-
long after he was gone. So that's how we met.
Yeah,
through David Rattray.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for
I
asking
know
that.
David. When did you see each other after that?
Well, we would see each other.
Then we
like-
began to see each other constantly.
Well, that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. At St. Mark's Poetry Project, at St. Mark's Books, and just
Openings
around,
and stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
So how old is this friendship?
So that's 82.
Yeah.
So what's that? Can you? I can't do math. It's like 20.
What year is this? 2016.
34.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
There's like, yeah, I know. There's like people the same age as our friendship.
Oh, God.
Like what?
Or you much younger than our friendship. What?
Have you ever had a fight?
No.
We sort of had fallings out. We had
We've had?
Yes.
What did we fall?
Remember
out
when
about?
everybody was mad at me around the high risk time?
I don't remember being angry.
I was
at you.
boycotted. I don't know if you were angry. You were less interested, I think. I thought you cooled to your subject.
I don't remember that at all.
I had a
And I
falling
think
out
that's
with
guilt by association.
maybe, yeah.
But why would people? What was? We'll have to discuss this later.
Yeah,
What
it was an
happened with the-
the worst thing, like anthologies, and then they, the people editing the anthology say that you people can come, but you people can't come, and so then it's this big social world, and it was very communal, and then it just got kind of divided.
One of the
And-
most horrible anthologies in that way, and I'm not trying to avoid this thing, was in the 60s. There was the New York Poets anthology put together by Ron Padgett and.
Oh, horrible!
Horrible.
Right.
And
Which
they-
one woman would
Well-
represent the women of the New York
Well,
School?
and they didn't include Barbara Guest.
Right, 'cause
who
they
was
didn't
a
like her
brilliant-
work.
They didn't like. Well, especially, they didn't like her husband. That was the thing. So they
Wow.
didn't include this brilliant poet because they didn't like her work. It was so idiotic. But we'll discuss high risk later.
But what's so weird about it, it's like the anthologies, it's like the end of the world, and it's like if I'm not in this anthology, then all my friends are in it, and
Yeah.
oh no, and I'm so, and it's like nobody even knows what this anthology is now.
That's
You
right.
know, it's so great how time just like erases every grievance, and
It should, shouldn't it?
I mean, yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then sometimes the people you hate die.
That's just what I was going to say. And what do I do with those shitty feelings now?
It's called displacement.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Like, you should
Yeah.
be.
Yeah,
Go
okay.
ahead.
So then you've been very vocal during this whole election season. It probably took a lot of energy also out of you, and I feel like now it's about to be over. And one of the things that we're kind of left with is this distrust of fact, or this sense that the public distrusts facts. So as public writer or as critic in this position, how do you feel like, all this thinking that you've been doing is going to inform what you're doing next? Or are you feeling a shift in your own writing? Are you feeling a shift in your public?
It's interesting you bring that up because I saw Rachel Maddow on Bill Maher one night, and there was during this election cycle, and there was some rabid Trump person, and Rachel Maddow was in a calmer mode because it wasn't her show, so she wasn't screaming. And she said something about the government budget office. You know, this, that, and this right-wing person said, well, if you trust that budget office or something like that. Now, this is the government budget office that people have been relying on, both parties and whatever, forever and ever and ever, to be accurate. And Rachel Maddow's face, it was really interesting. She said, you mean to say you don't even trust this, the facts of this? So it is very disturbing. I mean, I think facts are always, there are ways in which you cannot doubt that something happened, but interpretations will be different. But to, let's say, ignore that this did happen, or that, Trump calling Hillary Clinton a criminal when she's never been convicted of anything, those kinds of things. Has that affected my writing? I don't know. I don't think so. Although maybe it would be nice to write a political comedy. Although, who can match this, I mean, who can match this? And but the best commentators so far have been the stand-up comedians, and they are the ones who are speaking in a way that's so fresh and getting at stuff. So I don't know what. I don't know. It's an interesting question. I don't know what I'm going to do next.
I mean, I feel like there's something so interesting about, I mean, it's like when I've been around people who are voting for Trump, what I understand is that it's a kind of a fuck you gesture.
Right.
It's sort of like there's all that, and I don't know how to deal with it. I don't know how to break it down. I don't know how to, understand or relate or be with the substance of it. And so out of this exact same, when we talk about, somebody asks you to do something and you're like, no, and then you walk away and you're like, and you go into the space, It's like, but they don't do that. They just, it's sort of like, I'm going to vote for Trump. It's just a fuck you to all the things I can't handle.
Well, that's
and it's what
so interesting, Eileen, because the other day I started thinking about that one of the words that's not used in relation to these Trump supporters is nihilism. And I think that there is such a nihilist gesture, and definitely that fuck you thing, that these are people who feel nothing but anger or rage, and it's nothing, there's that kind of...
Yeah, because comedy is discourse.
Yeah, yes.
And that's what's so interesting. It's sort of, again, it's like comedy is the long form of this, right?
Yes.
Or there's an emoticon. It's just like, it seems like there's these really compacted ways of responding, like this, it's just, I mean, like even that, it was just like when people have been like, saying go Hillary. I mean, like a lot of people I know, I mean, look, I've been doing that, and it just has this Heil Hitler thing to it. It's sort of like when you find yourself in a space, you want to mark the space with brevity, and I part of me wants to have something that's as short as this, and it's like rare that I get to jump on a bandwagon and have that, but it's not how because it's not how I live. I think it's kind of, it feels liberating to be brief, but the thing that we get to do though is not be brief.
Do you
is
think
amazing.
Tomorrow people will...
This guy, we're going to call. You're going to get that question in, but say that next thought.
Okay.
Lynne.
Okay, I was just thinking, do you think tomorrow people will get up and say, I mean, in battleground states, I really do have to vote. I really have to vote against Trump. I have to vote for Hillary. I mean, that's what I'm hoping, like a sleeper cell. Like a whole country of sleeper cells waking up. Anyway, that's... Yeah.
Can I just say one thing too? I just feel like it's so like there's been so many mornings in history and so many mornings in America and so many mornings when people woke up and the thing they absolutely didn't expect to happen would happened.
Yeah.
And it's like, whose morning is it going to be? Because there's so many mornings tomorrow. You know, so many people are going to wake up and the wrong thing will have happened for them, no matter what happens, and we'll be living in that place. You know.
But surely this lesser of two evils is equally nihilistic, right? You know,
Surely what?
this narrative that vote for the lesser of two evils
Is
that
nihilism.
feels, and I come from the UK, and
But that's not the only narrative. That in itself is a reduced.
if the American people are going to rise up as a sleeper cell tomorrow and vote for the
Could you slow down and speak louder?
Yeah,
Unless you
speak
don't
a little
wanna-
louder.
do it.
Yeah, well, I come from the UK. and
Yes.
Heard that.
We just had a huge vote, as you know.
Yes.
But the 17 million people who voted Brexit, like, it's not just about hate. Like, these are working people that have been run into the ground for the last 30
Yeah.
years. And I think it's very dangerous to group, and it's happened a lot with the media in the UK. They've been grouped together, they've been called, racist and anti-immigration, etc. But these people are just, they're poor working people.
Yeah, we all have a class critique.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, and I don't mean to, that poor working people would see in Trump, though, some kind of savior is, it's something I have been, and we've all confounded by, because he is on face something so entirely not of the people. He doesn't give a damn. And yet people who have very little or feel they have nothing or don't have anything embrace him. And that's where, I mean, Brexit, I know a lot, I have a lot of English friends, and their parents voted for Brexit, and they're extremely upset about how this could have happened. And that was a lot about immigration and a lot about England as separate from Europe and the usual hostility, let's say, and a misunderstanding of the EU, apparently. This is something different. I don't mean to disregard what you're saying. I agree with you in part. But he is so not of them. I mean, when he loses, and he must, but of course there is Brexit, and when he loses, the question would he ever want to be with those people and all the doors that are going to be shut to him of the parties he really wants to go to and the people he wants to stay in his ugly hotels and who are not going to, I mean, he doesn't give a damn about these people. They're nothing to him. He's a pathological narcissist. And so that he becomes the savior, that's the genuinely upsetting thing. Supporting Bernie Sanders would be very different to me.
And everything I was saying about this is to be taking seriously the complexity of the feeling behind this. You know what I mean? It's like, this is not, a single statement. This is like, I'm overwhelmed by the number of things. I mean, I'm a working class person. I come from a working class background. I mean, it's just like, it's not, I think our voices are not heard, and it's just, there isn't accurate representation. And I think, and I think so much of American politics is about slumming. It's like everybody who takes power, if they don't come from the working class, takes on a Southern accent, gets regular, and kind of starts underclassing in order to get the people to understand. I mean, I feel like the working class are pawns of America. I mean, politics globally, but certainly in America.
Well, and it's also
it's part
hard
of
to
the
define
violation.
It's also, I mean, you can't do a Marxist analysis of what is the working class in America, particularly. I mean, you can talk about not owning the means of production. On the other hand, people who are working for GM now and auto workers make a middle class, if not upper middle class salary. So that also is a peculiar thing. And England plays out differently in that way. Even in terms of the way people dress. I remember in the 80s when Thatcher came in, a friend of mine said, and she was very left, but she was not from the working class. And it was kind of horrifying that now the working class weren't wearing the jackets they used to wear. Something like that. She said it as a joke, but that's not exactly, things here are weird in that way because money so often dominates. So should we have wine?